The network premiere of the hard-hitting Hotel Rwanda in an hour. First, royal service and loyal connections. The story of Backstairs Billy, the Queen Mum's butler.
Secret filming reveals an athlete performing a move known as the auto hold. The gymnast automatically and effortlessly holds her position on the incline without any rolling back or forth.
When Queen Elizabeth took the throne, the Queen Mother moved her court up the Mall to Clarence House. She would outlive her husband by more than 50 years, but for most of that time she would have one constant companion, her favourite butler William Tallon, known as Backstairs Billy.
Queen Elizabeth and Billy got on so well together because they were, in a way, birds of a feather and brought up on different sides of the track, but both with the same ideas in life.
William himself had said that when the lights go on in Clarence House, it's showtime.
William had a remarkable rise to power, and together with his partner Reg Wilcock, reigned supreme over the below-stairs empire.
He had, these two old queens with a real old queen. Now there is a plot and a half. The dotty housekeeper, the gin and tonic sagas, the corgis.
Yet there was a different side to the much-loved Tallon. Some who worked with him say he abused his privileged position.
There was no one to question him, no one. You got the impression from William he would just go straight to the Queen Mother. William was untouchable.
And William Tallon's meteoric rise would be followed by a spectacular and very public fall from grace. With exclusive access to Tallon's personal letters, photographs and palace documents, this is the story of the butler who saw it all, who, after a lifetime of devotion, would end up ousted from court and alone in the real world.
After the coronation of her elder daughter, the Queen Mother retired from the active scene. Now she moved quietly aside.
In 1953, the widowed Queen Elizabeth was forced to create a new role for herself as the Queen Mother. Her beloved husband, King George VI, had died. It was time to set up a new court just a few regal yards up the Mall at Clarence House.
Life inside Clarence House was very much upstairs, downstairs, and it was like stepping back 100 years.
What she created was, I suppose, the sort of last vestige of a kind of Edwardian court, a large, almost a country house in the middle of London.
The corgis were an ever-present part of the house. They were very intelligent little dogs and had very definite characters, and some of them were horrid and some of them were nice. They could give one the odd nip. When you first start, it's quite scary, but it did take a little while to work out where everybody was in this bizarre hierarchy.
It took nearly 30 employees to run Clarence House the way the Queen Mother liked it. These were divided into two groups: the upper household, or officials who ran the Queen Mother's engagements, and the below-stairs staff, which included stewards, butlers, footmen, valets, cooks and maids. In 1955, the below-stairs staff welcomed a new employee, William John Stevenson Tallon. Aged only 15, William had written directly to King George VI asking for work. In 1951, he began as a footman at Buckingham Palace. At the end of his first day, he wrote a letter home to his parents in Coventry.
Dear Mum and Dad, I arrived safely at the palace at 11 a.m. I then caught a train to Windsor Castle and was shown where the drinks and silver was kept. Supper was eggs, baked beans and chips, then jelly. That's all for now. Love, Billy.
After 2 years at Buckingham Palace, William was invited to take up a new post at the Queen Mother's court. He was given a modest room in the staff quarters on the top floor.
When William was growing up, he became very fascinated by the royal family as a boy because the war had ended and things had been rather, I suppose, dull and grey. And I think he identified also with the style, of course, you know, and glamour, and those occasions were organised with a great deal of precision and perfection. And I think it was a home from him.
There was a team spirit. That didn't mean we didn't fight with each other like cats and dogs quite often, but we were all devoted to Queen Elizabeth, and it was really a team effort to help her with her job.
William started as a footman, and his duties included serving meals, opening and closing doors, and looking after the Queen Mother's dogs. William fitted neatly into the Queen Mother's team as he was gay like many of her below-stairs staff. 5 years into the job, he met Reg Wilcock, who also joined as a footman. The couple hit it off immediately.
William could be extremely temperamental and very tiresome at times. And Reg was a sort of steadying influence on the two of them. He was an extremely nice man, Reg. He had a tremendous laugh, Reg. And it was always when Reg was on duty, you could hear this laugh all over the house, which everybody rather liked.
Throughout his life, William had one close friend outside the palace, a kindred spirit called Rita Michael.
He was very handsome. He would have turned heads anywhere. No, he wasn't camp. He was over the top. But then most of the people I knew were over the top. God, I'd worked in hairdressing from being 16, so I was always quite well aware of men with different sexual proclivities, if you like. Moet champagne was actually 27 6 a bottle then. I can remember that because we used to be able to afford to buy that, and we could drink champagne most of the time. The Hilton was always a good place to meet all the Dorchester. We used to go and have a drink there sometimes. So we're all very pretending that we're very sophisticated. And we would get out of there and look at each other and then all just sort of fall about and laugh. And William would say, we got away with it again. Then nobody actually knows that we don't do this all the time.
By the late 60s, William was becoming a trusted part of royal life. He escorted Princess Margaret and her fiancé Anthony Armstrong-Jones as they wooed crowds on the social circuit. And together with Reg, looked after Prince Charles and Princess Anne when they stayed at Clarence House, whilst their mother was abroad on royal tours.
The children all grew up with them, and I think that was the basis of the friendship between the young royals, because William was at Buckingham Palace before Prince Charles was born, and of course knew them all their life.
As William and Rita's friendship grew, he allowed her more of an insight into his private world, inviting her to tea at his quarters in Clarence House.
I used to like saying that to the taxi drivers, Clarence House, please, and they used to say, shall we drop you at the end of the road, the Stoneleigh-on-Dread? And I used to say, no, take me to the door, please.
When the Queen Mother was away at Royal Lodge in Windsor, William would take the opportunity to give Rita a peep at life behind royal doors.
You had to go right up to the top of the house. William did have his own room, bed-sitting room. They had a trunk on the top corridor. It was sort of stamped HRH, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And he said to me, oh, God, you've actually sussed us out now, you know. We keep her in there fully dressed. When it's time for her to come out, she comes out.
After tea, William began his personal guided tour of some of the Queen Mother's living rooms.
William was a wonderful guide who I can remember he picked up something or I admired something and he said, "Oh, that's our latest gift, that's from Fabiola." And he turned around and he said, "She's the Queen of the Belgians, you know."
And finally, even a glimpse of Her Majesty's bedroom.
We happened to be looking out of the window and I said something about, "Oh, look at those poor people out there in the rain." And William said, "Why don't you give them a wave? They won't know that you're not royal and they'll be so thrilled that somebody's waved to them." So I did. I gave them a nice regal wave, and I'm quite sure that there are hundreds of elderly people in Japan with photographs of me that they say, "Who the hell is that?"
In 1970, a sprightly Queen Mother celebrated her 70th birthday at Clarence House. William Tallon entered his third decade of royal service. The working-class boy from Coventry had risen through the below-stairs ranks to become the Queen Mother's personal page, and their close friendship blossomed.
There's an invisible boundary which he didn't cross, but the boundary became, the edges became rather fluid, I think, and I suppose if you're working with somebody at close quarters over a long period of time, there's bound to be a degree of affection arising, otherwise it simply wouldn't work. She was a great people enhancer, and in his own way, you know, Billy was too, and that everything was done with a great sense of style and theatre. And in a way, I think he felt he was always on the stage.
One thing the Queen Mother and William shared was a love of parties and a tipple. Clarence House played host to hundreds of guests, and William was in his element, in command of the drinks trolley.
His job was to get everybody, you know, into the room, get them relaxed, give them a drink. Once they were all settled, then he would go to the Queen Mother, and she would go into the room and take over, and he would, and his team would subside to some extent into the background. So they were the warm-up team, if you like.
It was fueled, of course, by strong drink. He just made the whole night go the swing. And of course, he would help to lace people's drinks if people were slightly shy, of course.
Well, I think was one who sort of more or less had to be carried out because he didn't realise that these nice drinks he were having were pretty potent.
One was certainly on one's guard when it was mixed by William, that's for sure.
Another person who had a privileged view of life inside Clarence House and observed William's intimate relationship with the boss was the painter Richard Stone. In 1973, he was invited to paint the Queen Mother's portrait.
I first met William on my very first occasion when I arrived at Clarence House. Well, it was definitely the poshest place I'd been in until that point. I'd been to some very nice homes, but this was pretty special. For me, it was something I had dreamt about. I had always wanted to paint Queen Elizabeth's portrait.
Richard was instructed to set up his easel in the garden room at Clarence House, and over the following few days, he began regular sittings with the Queen Mother. He soon realised that inside Clarence House, business was always combined with pleasure.
I had been working at Clarence House for 3 days when William came in mid-morning. He had a message from Queen Elizabeth asking if I would join her for luncheon. It was positively thrilling. She was sitting at the head of the table, and I was invited to sit on her left. It was an occasion when I was so glad that my mother had instilled in me good table manners and remembering to start from the outside and work in. Lunch was beginning to extend, and sittings were scheduled for that afternoon. Whether or not it was my exhausting conversation, or maybe a little too much wine, both Queen Elizabeth and I decided that it might be better to postpone that afternoon's sitting. Oh dear, talking about it now brings it all back, but it was...
After 3 months, the portrait was finished, and William and Richard had become close friends. Richard was due to be married, and he thought William would make the perfect best man. Yet William felt compelled to run the idea past his better half.
I think he was stunned when I asked him, and I know he shared this invitation that I was extending to him with Queen Elizabeth, and I think she too was surprised. Then she said, "Well, I feel I ought to get him a present." And on the day, the most beautiful tea service arrived, brought on the train by William, with a little engraved note. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather.
After nearly 30 years' service to the Queen Mother, William Tallon finally achieved the high point of his below-stairs career. On the 14th of April 1978, a Clarence House memorandum announced,
Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, has been pleased to approve Mr. Tallon to be steward and page of the back stairs, and Mr. R. Wilcock to be deputy steward and page of the presence.
In this mysterious hierarchical world, William was now top dog of the below-stairs staff. He was in control, and Reg, his partner, his right-hand man.
He telephoned me, and he said, you know, "Darling, I've got the household," or "I've got the house." That was what he said, "I've got the house." And he was so thrilled.
I think he couldn't believe his luck in a way, you know. He said that the little boy from Coventry, you know, who used to look at the palace from afar, and he'd reached the pinnacle. He was able to choose the wines, he was able to go out and buy the flowers. He became almost like a stage director or a theatre producer. You know, when something was going to happen, he produced all the props.
William's relationship with the boss had become so informal he could take snapshots of her when she was off duty. And he also kept many of her written requests as a record of his service.
I think that I will take 2 small bottles of Dubonnet and gin with me this morning, in case it is needed.
Some requests could take a little bit more organising.
If it is a beautiful day, could we have lunch under the tree? One could have 14 at the table, with 4 at a small table.
And sometimes they were in a royal league of their own.
Would you give a message to Captain Aird to ask if the helicopter could be here to start at 3 o'clock instead of 3:30 tomorrow? Have you any Pims here?
His job, I mean, he once defined it to me. He said, my job was to keep her smiling. He had a sort of a different line to the Queen Mother, if you like, than the other people did. I mean, they had their particular times when they saw her, but he was there from really the moment that she came down to have her morning tea or coffee in the morning room until the Queen Mother finally said goodbye to the last guest of the evening and went to bed at night, which could have been way after midnight.
William and his partner Reg were now the powerful couple with unrivalled influence inside Clarence House. As the Queen Mother reached 80, the duo went over the heads of the upper household officials of the house, persuading her to greet the crowds from her balcony. This time, the public caught a glimpse of the top dogs at work. They dutifully greeted the royal family as they arrived. First Prince Charles, then the Queen, and finally Princess Margaret. Now the press had a face to put to William and coined the nickname Backstairs Billy.
I'd actually heard about Billy Tallon before I'd even seen him because, you know, he was a legend when I went there in the mid-80s. He'd made himself what he was, effectively. He knew his strengths, he knew his position, and he knew how powerful that was. And he did wield some power there, you know, given that if Billy didn't like you and you were part of that royal scene, could make life pretty difficult.
Over the years Ken worked for Diana, he witnessed William's tactical manoeuvring inside the royal court. Having been close to Prince Charles for nearly 30 years, William understood the importance of forming an allegiance to the shy new bride-to-be.
We wouldn't have to wait too long.
He was a mover and a shaker, and he could assess people very, very quickly. And in Diana's case, you know, new on the scene, as it were, as a young bride, you know, he'd be the sort of guy to make her feel very welcome. Now, Diana would react to that, you know, she would strike up this relationship.
On July the 29th, 1981, Charles and Diana were married, and the country was drunk on royal euphoria. And just a day after her wedding, Diana took the time to write and thank her friends, including William.
I cannot thank you enough for showing such extreme kindness to me by putting your flowers in my room. I adored spending my last night at Clarence House, and that I will never forget.
Other letters from Diana to William reveal the affectionate bond he was expertly forging with her.
Both parents are making little sense. We just seem to spend most of our time gazing at this tiny person. William, you always manage to remember the things that mean so much to me. I cannot thank you enough except to say that I am deeply touched. Diana.
We used to go down to the Queen Mother's birthday. I mean, this was a ritual at Clarence House where, you know, the entire family would turn up for the, you know, for the yearly photo shoot that was almost single-handedly masterminded by Billy, who'd be there as the meter and greeter. Well, I mean, he'd greet the Queen and everybody else as though they were long-lost friends. The first thing Diana would say, "Oh, hello, Billy," and he'd come over and, you know, they'd shake hands and he'd sort of chat away and how the boys, all this sort of stuff. And there were a lot of people within the royal household that were envious, not only of his style, but his position, and he was virtually untouchable.
In 1984, William's supreme position became even more privileged. After 30 years of life on the top floor of Clarence House, living in with the rest of the servants, William got what he had always dreamed of, his own home. The Queen Mother had pulled strings, and on the 1st of October, she wrote to him,
William, I have spoken to the Queen about the little house, and I'm sure that something can be arranged, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction.
The little house was the Gate Lodge, next to the main entrance of Clarence House. It was small and shabby and had been a storeroom. But in an unprecedented change of protocol, William was allowed to transform it into his home and pack it full of his belongings. Now he too had a stage upon which to express his flamboyant self.
He'd have people from the arts world and film stars, comedians, beautiful young girls, beautiful young men, everybody. They all piled in, as many as could fit.
It was a microscopic palace. It was full of portraits and vases and statues and beautiful glass. You know, when he gave you a drink, it was in a crystal glass. I suppose it's being attached to the palace in a way that rubs off on you and you almost become part of royalty.
He was very, very super gregarious and super flirty. He was just a real imp, just full of wickedness. When I say wickedness, I mean wickedness in the nicest possible impish way. He wouldn't even let your champagne glass get half empty. He was always topping it up.
He was very theatrical. He should have been an actor. He was larger than life, great fun, a naughty man, really.
But just when William was flying high, he was about to make his first major slip-up after 36 years of royal service. One night, he had a secret liaison with a young man that would tarnish his reputation.
There was an incident in 1991 when he invited a young man back to the house, and that's one of the times, I think, when the royal household in Clarence House thought they'd got him.
The man turned out to be an ex-rent boy and thief, and the news of the world splashed the story across the front page. William had embarrassed the palace, and the upper household officials, who had long been envious of his growing power, called for his head. But the Queen Mother protected her #1 servant and told them William was staying.
And in fact, I believe her comment at the time was, wasn't it nice of him to invite that young man back into the house when it was raining so hard outside? To which they no doubt all said, oh, whoops, gosh, that's the attitude, right, we better just pipe down. Which is very pragmatic of her, shall we say.
William had survived the long knives of the palace officials, but his public blunder would mark the beginning of his downfall, and his below-stairs empire would start to crumble. By the beginning of the 90s, William Tallon had been the Queen Mother's devoted servant for nearly 40 years. The day-to-day running of Clarence House was firmly under William's control. But in 1992, his authority would be challenged when a young applicant wrote inquiring about a possible vacancy.
I'd always been fascinated by them, and we were always brought up to respect them, certainly by my great-grandma. So I suppose I always just had that interest.
19-year-old Liam Cullen Brooks was invited for an interview, and the first person he met inside Clarence House was William.
My first impressions of William was he was very flamboyant, and coming from Maidstone, I didn't know many other gay people at the time, and it was blatantly obvious that William was gay. But the interview was only probably about 15 minutes long with William, and as he went out I remember him putting his hand on my shoulder and just squeezing my shoulder and saying, "It'll all be fine."
Liam was offered the job of footman, and on his first day he met the rest of the below-stairs staff when they assembled for dinner.
It was a huge table, and there was the Queen's footman at one end, there was a housemaid at the very other end, and then there was just all the staff around the table. It reminded me of Upstairs, Downstairs, because I'd watched that as a child with my mum, and it really was them and us. That was the impression you were given. I'm not saying that's what the royals thought, but that's the impression the staff gave you. It was very different to any other job I'd ever had, because it meant you've got to live and work with these people, and that was something I'd never done before.
After just a few weeks inside Clarence House, Liam soon learned that there was a different side to William and his partner Reg. Not only did they have unquestioned control, but they also had their own clique of favourite staff.
William and Reg made it known from the beginning who they liked and disliked. And if you got on with people they didn't like, you would know about it pretty quick. And it was quite difficult to think that you couldn't have different friendships if they didn't like them. And that's when I noticed how unpleasant they could both be, and especially William.
He wasn't the great Billy Tallon to everybody. To some, he was feared. The one thing that he had was the support and ear of the top lady, the boss, effectively. Now, if you've got that, you've really got almost supreme power.
After nearly 40 years of royal service, Liam believes William's power was beginning to corrupt him. He now amused himself by humiliating younger members of his staff in front of the boss.
You'd set up a table, for example, of all clean silver and all the rest of it. Say, for example, it would be a big luncheon at Clarence House, and the Queen Mother usually come down to inspect the table. William would go around putting dirty cruets on the table, and she'd walk in and she'd always notice if something was out of place. And in the beginning, you felt really bad and you just apologise and you'd change it. In the end, I'd just say, well, it was clean until William had moved it, Your Majesty. And she used to just smile. I had no idea what she thought. There was these long trees with these straggly little leaves on, and there'd always be leaves falling on the floor, so we'd go around, sweep them up, water the plants and all the rest of it. But you'd sweep it so it was all nice and it was all tidy, and then 5 minutes later William would come through, you haven't done the trees, and you think, yes, we've just done them. And there was 3 of us, so we knew we'd done them. William or Reg had gone by and shaken them again and got even more, or even picked the leaves off and dropped them to the floor. There was no one to question him, no one. And you got the impression from William, whether it was true or not, all he had to do is if he needed something, if he didn't believe in something maybe the household had said, he would just go straight to the Queen Mother and she could overrule everything. So whatever happened, he always had the upper hand.
After decades of royal parties, strong drink was becoming a lifestyle for William. The one-time wizard of the cocktails was falling foul of his own magic.
When William drank, he got paralytic and was extremely difficult, and there was no one sort of keeping him in check.
Yet Liam claims there was a more sinister side to William's indulgences. He and others believe William used his dominant position to make unwelcome advances towards some of his staff.
There was a footman that was invited to William's gate lodge for drinks, and I said to him, don't go. William will get you drunk and things will happen that I'm sure you don't want to happen. And myself and another footman had a phone call, I don't know, about 11 o'clock one night to say, would you come and get me? I can't get out of the flat. And William had got him drunk, basically. And that happened quite regularly. And he would make advances on them. And that must have been quite scary for some of the staff that weren't gay, and for the ones that were, because that's not what you do.
In 1996, after 4 years of royal service working under William, things came to a head and Liam snapped.
He'd done his usual at lunchtime and got drunk, and I had a huge argument with him, and he said, do you know who you're talking to? I said, yeah, a bitter old queen who said, you know, who's got nothing to offer life other than to get pissed every day and cause untold troubles for everybody else. And I think he was quite upset, because I don't know that anybody had really ever told him what for. Nobody sacked me. I wanted to leave. I'd had enough. I could not put up with it any longer. Oh, it was very much bullying. But there was no one to turn to. You know, if you get bullied in a normal job, you go to your line manager, and then if that doesn't work, you go on and so forth. But there was no one to turn to, because your line manager was the one doing it.
Staff came and went, but life inside Clarence House carried on. The Queen Mother stayed loyal to her most trusted servant. The pair were growing old together inside Clarence House, and the bond between them was almost like a love affair. William would remain safe as long as the Queen Mother was there to protect him. Queen Mother hysteria reached fever point as she edged ever closer to her centenary year. Annual birthday appearances warmed the heart of the nation, and William's public profile grew as he was needed by her side more and more. In the year of the millennium, the Queen Mother reached the grand old age of 100. And to mark the occasion, an evening pageant was held in her honour, celebrating some of her favourite screen stars through the decades. Under the spotlight as ever were William and the beloved corgis. Remarkably, the Clarence House show rolled on into its 101st year. William had ruled the roost for nearly 50 years from below stairs. But these birthday celebrations would be remembered for all the wrong reasons, and outside, the press were waiting.
We've been waiting there for probably a couple of hours, really, when the doors open, the Queen Mother leads the rest of the family out, flanked by Her Majesty the Queen, and then it was that moment, which was quite a shocking moment, when we hadn't seen very much of Princess Margaret, and she was wheeled out with Billy at the helm, if you like, and she looked appalling. I mean, her face was bloated, her eyes shielded by these wraparound black glasses, and she was in this wheelchair, and none of us had really seen that. I do remember the photographers thinking immediately, that is the story, and that's the photograph.
The shock of Princess Margaret's ill health stole the headlines, as up till now the world hadn't realised how unwell she'd become. The upper household officials were again furious with William, as the papers stirred up rumours he had taken the decision upon himself to wheel Margaret out, without permission.
I think it was largely press. I mean, William actually told me that Princess Margaret told him to do it. And nobody stopped him, you know. And William was one who quite naturally would obey orders, certainly from a member of the royal family. I do honestly think he was quite sure it wasn't his fault, and I'm quite sure it wasn't, actually.
Whether William had done anything wrong or not, his time in royal favour was coming to an end. Princess Margaret died just 6 months later, on the 9th of February 2002. After the death of her youngest daughter, the Queen Mother developed a chest infection and her health deteriorated rapidly, forcing her to retire to Royal Lodge in the grounds of Windsor Castle to receive 24-hour nursing. William was stranded at Clarence House, unable to help her anymore. The Queen Mother died at 3:15 p.m. on the 30th of March 2002. Millions around the world watched her funeral procession through the capital as 1,700 members of the armed forces escorted her coffin. Amongst the procession were members of her loyal Clarence House staff, including William. And in his grief, he broke his rule of silence.
Most a wonderful employer, very compassionate, incredibly kind, very understanding. And I loved her. So sorry. Thank you very much.
But the grieving William was ill-prepared for what was about to happen. Unbeknown to him, not only had he lost his beloved employer, but the household had contrived to oust him from Gate Lodge. He would be tolerated no longer.
Even William hadn't fully realised that once the Queen Mother had gone, maybe his champion had gone. And so there was nobody there for him anymore. And I think even he was quite surprised at the brutality with which it was sort of carried out. Really, you must go.
A letter from William to Rita, written in June 2002, just 3 months after the funeral, reveals how bitter he felt about being told to leave Gate Lodge, his little palace that the Queen Mother had fought for him to have.
My dear Rita, life is bloody at the moment, and I must move house within the month. The palace and privy purse have behaved appallingly, but what can one do? Please, if you could bear it, darling, give me a call. It would be so good to hear you.
William also confided in Rita that the Queen had come to visit him before he left.
She did spend 2 hours with William, and I don't think ever once, as far as William told me, did she say, "Thank you for everything you did for my mother." And worse, when she was leaving, she told him not to worry about the corgis because they were fine. But nobody actually cared about whether William was fine. But he was quite stunned by the Queen's sort of total incomprehension, really, of what it meant to him. William had given a lifetime to the family. All he wanted was some recognition. That's what hurt him, I think.
William Tallon had lived inside the royal household for over 50 years, ruling his own little empire. He had believed he would stay there forever, but he dutifully cleared Gate Lodge of all his belongings. William now had to survive in the outside world, where the press were waiting for him. After 50 years cocooned inside royal palaces, William Tallon found himself out in the real world. He'd now lost the two most important people in his life, his beloved Queen Mother and lifelong partner Reg, who had died of leukemia 2 years earlier. William took over Reg's ground floor flat in Kennington, South London, and living off his modest palace pension, tried to fend for himself.
In a way, he was sort of institutionalised, because he'd always lived in the household. He'd never bought food. He never had to run a house in the sense that you have to find a plumber when the drains get blocked. And I don't think he'd very often shopped in a supermarket. And so I think that was very tough for him after Queen Elizabeth died, and he found himself living in a world in which he had to fend for himself.
He hadn't had to do very much shopping. He was a bit lost when it came to going to somewhere like Sainsbury's. And in fact, we took over his shopping for him. We used to get him stuff every week and bring it back. And he gradually settled into it, and we saw more and more of him.
Away from the relative safety of life inside palace walls, William was now exposed to the press, and they stalked him, offering huge sums of money to spill the beans on life inside Clarence House.
Some of the newspapers made a nuisance of themselves. They would stake out this road, and once or twice journalists followed him when they knew he'd been to a party to try and get him to say something. But he was extremely discreet and very loyal, and refused, and they kept up the pressure for quite a long time.
He told me that it was in his pyjamas, and he went down to put something in his rubbish bin and looked up, and there was a zoom lens on him. And he said, "You have to do this to me." And they said, "Yes, till you talk."
Then one October night, William would unwittingly play himself straight into the hands of the tabloids. By now, he'd become a well-known face at society parties, a must-have name on the guest list.
On the social circuit and socially, he just, as I said, he just radiated happiness and warmth, and always had something funny to say, something agreeable to say. He was fabulous, fabulous.
That night, together with Basher, William attended a champagne reception in Chelsea, and the press pack were on his tail. William was drunk, and when Basher left, she asked a friend to drive him home, worried he might carry on drinking at his local pub.
But then I think she was a little bit pickled as well. So she just put William into a taxi, which was a silly thing to do, because as soon as he got to that pub, the dog house, you know, he got out and carried on drinking.
The photographers had followed William and were waiting when he came out of the pub. As he tried to cross the road, he stumbled and fell, ending up flat on his back. William had once again made the headlines.
He found life very hard. He told me he used to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and didn't know what to do with himself. Because I think in the dark hours of the night, when one is particularly depressed and everything seems awful, I was always worried he might take an overdose or something.
Decades of drinking were now beginning to take their toll. In the spring of 2007, William collapsed at home and was referred to hospital with liver problems. He was told to stop drinking, but by autumn was inviting friends to dinner again.
He usually just had a couple of bottles of wine and a few odds and ends, but on this occasion he said, "Oh, I'd like 4 bottles and a rack of lamb." That was his favourite food. So we got that on the Friday. We weren't surprised when he didn't come over on the Friday, but when it got to Saturday late afternoon, and I said, perhaps I'd better go across and make sure everything's all right. And we had a key to the flat, and we found William lying by the side of his bed. I think he died early on the Saturday morning rather than the Friday night.
William Tallon died of liver failure on the 23rd of November 2007, aged 72. He had spent over 50 years by the Queen Mother's side, even longer than her husband. William remained untouchable as long as the Queen Mother had been there to defend him. Yet, at the end, his fall from grace had been swift and unforgiving.
He was extremely loyal to her over a huge number of years, and to know that you had somebody you could absolutely trust. And he turned down huge sums of money and never stopped being loyal to the day of his death in that way.
I think it is an end of an era with the departure of Billy Tallon. Now, there are those that would say, hey, we don't want any more of those, because actually they were unpoliceable. And what the royal household wants now is to be able to control all of this.
He was kind, he was irreverent, he never ever forgot where he came from. He was a lovely man, and the most abiding memory is fun. We had so much fun, so much laughter.
Whether people loved or loathed William, he was undoubtedly a one-off who took many of his secrets to the grave. And who knows whether his spirit still lives on, somewhere in the corridors of Clarence House.
Next Monday at 9, the story of the princess and the gangster. Details coming right up. Next tonight, remarkable performances from Don Cheadle and Sophie Okonedu as the couple caught up in a terrible genocide. Hotel Rwanda.